Hello and welcome back to Tinker Talks Guns. 22 Hornet. It's a cartridge that's been around for a long time. A lot of people aren't familiar with it these days, especially here in America. This started life as a different cartridge, as many do. The 22 Winchester centerfire, introduced in 1885 for a single-shot Winchester small game and, hunting rifle. And that was a black powder cartridge. Now, in the 1930s, realizing that smokeless powder was a whole new ball game, a bunch of people played around with that cartridge and smokeless powder and came up with 22 Hornet, which was enormously more powerful than 22 Winchester centerfire. It typically shoots a 45 grain bullet at about 2,500 feet per second. There are loads that shoot a 32 grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second from a full-length rifle, 24-inch barrel, and it's been fairly popular as a varmint cartridge and for small game hunting. In Europe, it's still quite popular for those uses. And but over here, it's kind of faded into obscurity since COVID. It used to be, it was very easy for me to find brass and even ammunition. Ammunition is not cheap, but it was easy. It's not easy anymore. And that matters, because I decided to make a rifle chambered in 22 Hornet. Why did I decide to do this? We'll get to that. But first, I'd like to say a very special thanks to Chris at Pinto's Guns for providing the ammunition used in this video, which is Privy Partisan 45 grain soft point bullets. I haven't looked up the exact velocity, but I'd be pretty surprised if it was below 2,500 feet per second from a 24-inch barrel. I'd also like to thank my supporters on Patreon. All of this costs money. Your contributions help more than you know. If you'd like to join them, there's a link in the description below. And Chris and Pinto's Guns are one of many of the channel benefactors, businesses and individuals who have been enormously helpful to the channel in any number of ways. Thank you all. So, the other week, I was handed a generic single-barreled 410 with a bent barrel. And this thing had a massive barrel. We have no idea what it took to bend that barrel in the way it was. And kind of a crap forend and missing a firing pin. And they said, see what you can do with this. And what I could do with it was take a surplus 1022 Ruger barrel, which I happened to have around, and contact a friend of mine who had recently told me that he had a 22 Hornet chamber reamer. So I asked him if I could borrow it. That's Brett from JD Guns. Thank you, Brett. And he's also sending me some brass, which, since it's practically unobtainium these days, is a good thing. So thanks again, Brett. So I did things with stuff and came up with this. A single shot 22 Hornet carbine. And it is currently sporting a very stylish Bushnell TRS 25 that is, I don't know how old. It's been around for, knocking around for years, been mounted on various weapons. And we'll get into this a little bit more on the tabletop, but we'll come back to that because I need to talk about the first time I fired this gun on Tuesday of this week. I took it to the range, loaded it, shouldered it, fired, and there was an enormous amount of blowback from the breech, and something hit me in the forehead hard enough to leave a mark and actually draw blood. Pretty sure that's not how it's supposed to work. So I checked. To my woe, I had not started the camera. Damn it. What had hit me in the forehead was the firing pin, and the primer in the cartridge was blown out. And Obviously, when I fabricated a new firing pin, I made a mistake. So, we'll talk more about the exact mistake and what I did about it on the tabletop. So, I took it home. I felt I had corrected the issue by making a new firing pin and being very careful with my dimensions and making sure everything was just so. Took it back to the range yesterday on Wednesday. And I'm not the sharpest spoon in the drawer, but I learned. I fired it at full extension, like a pistol. Let's have a look at how that went. I didn't get hit in the forehead by the firing pin this time. And I brought the gun home and set about figuring out how to fix the firing pin, which we'll cover in the tabletop. The firing pins on weapons like this are typically pretty simple. It's a cylinder with a cutout on one side for a pin to keep it from coming out, and a pin sticking out the front end. What I determined was that the original pin, which was about 1/10 of an inch in diameter, was not working and playing well with the cutout necessary to allow the firing pin full movement, and it was simply evading the pin and flying out. So, also the last time it marked the pin significantly, and so I had to fabricate a pin out of music wire. I decided to go big. I used a 3/16 inch cobalt drill bit, drilled the hole out to 3/16 of an inch, and then I took another chromium cobalt drill bit that had kind of gone to shit and cut off the shaft and used that as the pin. Nothing's going to defeat that pin. And I enlarged the bottom of the firing pin, where it engages over the pin, so that it would continue to function. And function it does. Now, typically for weapons of this type, the hammer is retracted and can't go forward unless the trigger is pulled, and then it pushes the firing pin out just enough to strike and detonate the cartridge. So, problem solved, right? Yeah, kind of a belt and suspenders sort of guy, so I set up a bullet trap and fired 2 rounds to make certain that it was going to work. And it does. But the firing pin hole, being for a shotgun, is rather large, and the primers tend to expand into the hole, which locks it up a little bit and requires force to get the gun to open. But once it does, it extracts just fine and everything works. So, we're going to depart from the tabletop briefly to show you how today's shooting session went. Spoilers, it was much better. that was much more satisfactory, and we'll talk more about that later. So this is a shotgun originally made by Continental Arms Company in 410 with a breech easily big enough for 12 gauge. And as I said, the barrel was quite stout. So what I did to make this happen, a little awkward, is I reamed it out to 5/8 of an inch. Then I turned down the end, the breech end, of the Ruger 1022 barrel, which are also hella stout. I turned that down to 5/8 of an inch so that it was a tight fit. And then I silver soldered it into the breech, which so far has shown every indication of working just fine. And then I used the reamer in my drill press to ream out the chamber. And I had an old cartridge that someone had found that I was able to use to make sure it head spaced correctly, and I had got it in far enough. The ejector is more of an extractor at this point. It tends to pull the cartridge out but not fling it out. And that's fine, because with the difficulty of obtaining brass, every piece is precious. I want to keep them. Now, what I did to make this work is I cut away the back of the original ejector, and I made a piece, a very simple little piece, and silver soldered it in place. And you can see there's a big blob of silver solder here that I haven't bothered cleaning up because, frankly, it doesn't need to be cleaned up, but I certainly wasn't going to put the effort in before I made sure everything worked, and work it does. So I did cut the end of the barrel off to facilitate getting this in the lathe rather. And I fabricated this plate out of nice thick mild steel to hold the forestock in place, which is held in place by a screw here that is sharpened on the other end and just bears on the front of the wood. Now, the wood is a random piece of old Douglas fir 2x4, nicely seasoned, and just sanded down, lightly stained, and lacquered to this finish. And it is serviceable. It's not perfect, but I think it looks good, and I really like it. I made no modifications to the receiver other than fabricating a firing pin and enlarging the hole that goes in it. And to take this apart, screwdriver born, you simply loosen this screw until it pokes out a bit, and then push on that, and you can see where the pointed end of the screw engages. And then it's simply a matter of breaking open the action and lifting off the barrel. So I did do light refinishing and bluing on this with Oxbow blue, just as a protective measure. I made no effort to make it pretty. And everything works just as it should. There was a lot of rust removal and a lot of refinishing on the things like the trigger guard and stuff. And then, of course, I sanded and lacquered the stock, which came out rather nicely. And you can see there was somebody driven in a pattern of nails on each side into a diamond. Doesn't seem to be functional or anything, and there's nothing I can do about it, so I left it alone. But overall, not in bad shape. Butt's a little chewed up with some chips out of it and things. Polished it up a little bit, cleaned it up, and it works fine. That, of course, is retained by two big flat tip screws, and inside there's another long screw that comes to the back of the receiver and screws into a hole there and holds everything together. So now basically I just took wood chisels and carved out this groove, and I haven't really bothered going to great lengths to finish it yet, because I was more concerned with getting it working, and it's really not that kind of gun. You can see here I screwed up a little bit because I am no master of the wood chisel, but it works. It does what it's supposed to. And this screw would originally have held on the mechanism that locked this in place. But now what it does is keep everything nicely centered in the receiver. So it still serves a function, although I've replaced the machine screw that held the metal part on with a wood screw, because that's fine. I have not gone to great lengths to refinish the breech, but I did flatten the top of it and install a section of Picatinny rail that was lying around so that I could mount a scope. And I have a set of 1-inch scope mounts, so when I come across the proper scope, this is definitely getting a scope. So the weapon can be taken down for transport relatively easily, and is very easy to reassemble with nothing but a screwdriver or a multi-tool, or screwdriver porn. And it tends to self-center if it's just a little off when you screw it in. So nice and secure. And it really needs a scope. I'm considering a 3 or 4 power, or maybe a 3 to 9 variable. We'll see what comes up. Oh, and as you can see, I have reloading dies, because reloading is going to be crucial. Now, Brett Mills was going to send me reloading dies, very nice of him, along with the brass. But Monday, Linda said, oh, by the way, your dies are here. And I said, dies? What dies? And she says, your 22 Hornet dies. I ordered them off Amazon. God, I love that woman. So, thank you, Linda. I've already used them to decap some of the brass I've fired and resize it, which has gone well. And these are, again, Privy Partisan PPU ammo. And, you know, I've had good luck with their brass in general. These are generally held to be a relatively fragile cartridge, but these seem pretty stout. So, how does it shoot? You know it shoots. You saw the video of that. How does it shoot? With this red dot at 10 yards, when I was sighting it in enough to get it, you know, in the ballpark, it was shooting 1-hole groups offhand at 10 yards. That's all right. I moved it out to 20 whatever yards, the indoor range at Rain City Shooting Center is, and fired from a casual rest, and it shot 1-hole groups. So there's definitely accuracy there. But if I'm going to take advantage of that accuracy at any kind of range at all, it needs a scope. So I'll mount one of those on and get it out to 100-yard range and see what we've got. I'm kind of confident that it's going to be good. So, Bent Junk 410 is now a very nice, very handy little carbine, 16 3/4-inch barrel, 5 pounds 14 ounces, and very nicely balanced. And it just sits there in the hand, and it works really well. There is the thing with the primers, and I do have to give it a good smack to get it to open after I've fired it, because the primer's partly expanded into that oversized firing pin hole. There is a way to fix that, but it's a lot of work, and I'm not sure I'm going to do it, because it's fine. It's fine the way it is. I really like it. Now, recoil, of course, is next to nothing, which is really very nice. And I think this will be a good, really good small game gun once it's all dialed in. And I'm really happy with the way it's come out. So, I'm going to call this one a success. If you liked the video, please hit like below. It really helps the channel. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and like many other things, frankly. And that's it for this time. So, hope this finds you well. Stay safe and take care. And we'll talk to you again real soon.